Okay, now you can all hear me now, yes? Okay.
Sounds like a Verizon commercial.
All right, let me clarify a few things, because a lot of people, they say, wait a minute, you're the historian of the Navy Medical Department, and what does that have to do with astronomy? Well, the Navy Medical Department is located in Washington, D.C., right up the street from the Lincoln Memorial, if you know where that is. And that's the site of the original U.S. Naval Observatory on 23rd and East Streets, just down the street from George Washington University. So those of you who have been to Washington, you know where the State Department is, the Kennedy Center. It's the neighborhood known as Foggy Bottom. Right away people say, an observatory in a neighborhood called Foggy Bottom? What's that all about? Well, when they built it in 1842, they weren't thinking in terms of what the neighborhood was called. They found out about a year after the observatory was built. And by 1885, out of a possible 365 nights a year you could observe, 17 nights were good. So another one of those another one of those great government decisions.
Is that where the satellites of Mars by Asaph Hall?
Yes, that's where the moons of Mars were discovered by Asaph Hall in 1877. And it's hard to believe today, if you go down to that area of Washington, that they could have discovered anything. And it wasn't just light pollution. Light pollution is obviously a recent problem, the last maybe 100 years or so, 75 years. But it was the fogs that came in off the river. If you've ever been in Washington in the summertime, if you're lucky enough or unlucky enough to be in the nation's capital in the summertime, you will curse the Founding Fathers the way I do every summer. They could have done a better job at picking a capital than picking a swamp, but they picked Washington. And the people who picked a location for the Naval Observatory, I don't know what they were doing with their time, probably playing too many video games. But anyway, the observatory was at that site from 1844 when it was constructed until 1893 when it moved to the current site up on Massachusetts Avenue near the National Cathedral. Anyway, the reason I've picked this subject, Leopold Trouvelot, a lot of people want to know what's...
Sorry,
No.
I may have to kick this out. The fog is if I can.
All right, we can. I'll just shout.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Okay.
All right, I'll just talk real loud. Can you hear me, all of you? Okay.
So frustrating.
Anyway, Leopold Trouvelot is an interesting character. He's not well known by name, but he's certainly well known by what he gave us in the United States. And as I go through my talk, I think you'll understand what I'm talking about. Several summers ago, I would say about 10 years ago, I headed up to my summer cabin, which is on top of a wooded mountain ridge in West Virginia, in the Alleghenies. It was a bright June afternoon when I got there. In fact, it was far brighter than it should have been. What I saw in that forest made me both heartsick and extremely angry. The beautiful oak, maple, and hickory trees were completely denuded of their leaves. It was as though winter had arrived prematurely without any snow. The gypsy moth caterpillar was the instrument. The perpetrator of the crime was this man named Etienne Leopold Trouvelot. Who was Leopold Trouvelot? And what prompted him to unleash what I would call a late 19th century environmental disaster upon North America? This image on the left here shows defoliation in the 1890s. This has been a long-running scourge that we've had about the gypsy moth. This photograph was taken in Medford, Massachusetts in about 1890. The photograph on the right was taken in the late 1970s. Leopold Trouvelot was born the day after Christmas in 1827 in France, a town named Ain, France. And unfortunately, we don't know very much about Trouvelot's early upbringing. We know very little about his upbringing and his early life. As we'll find out, we know very little about his end also. It seems he was drawn to politics. and he was a strong Republican in the sense of Republican France at the time. Unfortunately, there was a lot of goings-on politically in France, and the French Republic was overthrown by a coup d'etat. Louis Napoleon became the emperor. He seized power in 1852. Trouvelot decided it was time to get out of Dodge. He left because apparently he was wanted as far as his political leanings were concerned, and he would have ended up in prison. So what did he do? He came to America, as most people did in those days when they fled their homeland looking for liberty. He brought his wife and his young son with him, and he immediately, being interested in science, he joined the Boston Society of Natural History, which led to an association with the famous Louis Agassiz, a very famous scientist, and a bunch of other naturalists. He supported himself and his wife and child as an artist. He had been an artist in France, and he was also a nature illustrator. He was very good at it. The year before our Civil War broke out, in 1860, the war broke out in 61, but in 1860 he took up residence in Medford, Massachusetts, a town some of you are familiar with. It's certainly the headquarters, the home, if you will, of Tufts University. And he bought a home on Myrtle Street, and there in the backyard, approximately, I think there were about 5 acres in his backyard, he decided to experiment with caterpillars. He was very interested in bringing a silkworm industry to the United States. He thought it would be a good thing. We imported a lot of our silk, as you know, from the Orient, from Egypt, from India, and he felt that a strong industry in silkworms would be really a good thing. Turned out it wasn't such a good thing. There's Trouvelot, there's the home on 27 Myrtle Street in Medford. So what he did, he began raising silkworm caterpillars in the backyard. He drove poles into the ground, and then he suspended over the poles a kind of a cheesecloth-like material. And he had bushes under there, and these caterpillars fed on the bushes and then started to produce silk. What he did was, for his source of silk caterpillars, he got a domestic variety called the Polyphemus. It's domestic in North America. And he began raising these things. It turns out that they love a diet consisting of oak, maple, and willow leaves. He became totally absorbed in this new hobby. He began observing the mating behavior and measuring individual food intake of these bugs, if you will. He even went as far as to remove tiny sections of the cocoons and put windows using mica so he could actually observe the digestion of how these things existed. And yet, while he did this work, he actually suspected that this could, if he was not careful, this could get out of hand. And this is what he says. This is a quote. "What a destruction of leaves this single species of insect could make if only 1/100th part of the eggs laid came to maturity. A few years would be sufficient for the propagation of a number large enough to devour all the leaves of our forests." End quote. Little did he know. But there was really no problem with this domestic variety of silkworm caterpillars. The fact was they had natural predators. Thrushes, catbirds, orioles, robins, and insects ate the Polyphemus caterpillar, so it kept them in check. The net he suspended on the poles in his backyard protected his investment. He spent a considerable amount of money buying these things, and he kept the local robins from eating them, and he estimated that these robins could, without the covering of the cheesecloth, could devour about 95% of the worms in short order. That's why he protected them.